Niccolò Machiavelli watched a republic collapse in real time. He watched Florence, one of the most sophisticated civilizations in human history, surrender itself, not to a superior enemy, not to an overwhelming force, to comfort, to factionalism, to the slow preference for security over greatness. He spent the rest of his life trying to understand exactly how it happened. What he concluded was not flattering, and it was not about Florence. It was about what every society does when it forgets what made it worth defending in the first place. He wrote it down. 500 years ago. It describes 2026 with surgical precision. Most people know Machiavelli as the man who said the ends justify the means. He never said that. What he actually was a Florentine diplomat, historian, and political theorist who spent decades watching power operate at close range, who served the Republic faithfully, was imprisoned and tortured when it fell, and spent his exile writing the most honest account of political reality ever committed to paper. The Prince is not a manual for villains. It is a diagnosis of how power actually works, as opposed to how people prefer to believe it works. And his deeper work, the Discourses on Livy, is something almost nobody reads, which is unfortunate, because it contains his most important observation. The observation about what he called virtù, and what happens to a civilization when it loses it. Virtù is not virtue in the moral sense. Machiavelli was precise about this distinction, and people have been misreading him ever since. Virtù is closer to force of character, the capacity for decisive action, the willingness to confront reality directly rather than managing it through comfortable illusions. A man with virtù does not wait to see what happens. He shapes what happens. He reads the situation clearly, acts decisively, and accepts the consequences of his action rather than the consequences of his inaction. The opposite of virtù is not evil. The opposite of virtù is softness, hesitation, the preference for the opinion of others over the evidence of your own eyes, the substitution of procedure for judgment and consensus for clarity. Machiavelli watched Florence lose its virtù in real time. He watched men who had once built and defended something extraordinary slowly become men who administered it, who managed it, who optimized for their own comfort within a system they no longer understood well enough to protect. And then he watched it fall. Machiavelli was specific about the mechanism. It was not laziness exactly. It was not stupidity. It was prolonged prosperity. He observed that the same conditions that produce greatness, security, wealth, stability, eventually undermine the character required to maintain them. A generation that builds something from nothing understands its value because they remember the nothing. The generation that inherits it has no such memory. They experience the security as a given, the wealth as a birthright, the stability as the natural state of things, rather than an achievement requiring constant maintenance. And so they stop doing the things that produced it. They stop cultivating virtù, because virtù is uncomfortable, and uncomfortable things are optional when everything is fine. They outsource the hard decisions to institutions. They mistake process for protection. They confuse the appearance of strength with strength itself. And then, when something actually threatens the structure, they discover that the capacity to defend it was quietly abandoned somewhere in the preceding decades of comfort. Machiavelli saw this in Rome. He saw it in Florence. He predicted it would happen again. It is happening again. The modern version of this process is more efficient than anything Machiavelli observed, because the mechanism that once required generations to complete now operates on the timescale of a single decade. The attention economy has industrialized the production of men without virtù, not through oppression, through optimization. A system that profits from passivity produces passive men. A system that profits from outrage produces reactive men. A system that profits from consumption produces men who have forgotten how to produce. Machiavelli's observation was that softness is not chosen, It is cultivated by the conditions a man lives inside, by the incentives those conditions create, by the slow replacement of genuine challenge with the simulation of challenge. The man who spends 3 hours consuming content about discipline has not practiced discipline. He has practiced consumption. And the algorithm that served him that content is not interested in his development. It is interested in his continued presence. Machiavelli would have recognized this system immediately. He would have called it by its correct name. Machiavelli was not a pessimist. He believed virtù could be recovered, that the capacity for decisive, clear-eyed action was not permanently lost, only dormant, buried under layers of comfort and procedure and the accumulated preference for the opinion of others. But he was honest about what recovery required. It required the willingness to see clearly, to look at the situation as it actually is, rather than as you need it to be. To act on that clarity even when acting is costly, and inaction is comfortable. He called this reading Fortuna correctly. Fortuna was his word for circumstances, the conditions a man finds himself in. And his observation was that Fortuna rewards the man who moves against it decisively over the man who waits for it to become more favorable. The man who waits for perfect conditions never acts. The man who acts in imperfect conditions shapes them. That gap between the man who acts and the man who waits is where virtù lives. And it is a choice, made daily, in the same small moments that Nietzsche's Last Man fills with blinking. Machiavelli died in 1527, unwanted by the republic he had served, suspected by the Medicis he had tried to impress, read by almost nobody during his lifetime. He spent his final years writing letters to friends about farming, about the boredom of exile, about the gap between the man he had been and the conditions he had been given to work with. And somewhere in that exile, unrecognized, politically finished, watching everything he understood about power operate without him, he wrote the clearest account of political reality in Western history. That is what virtù looks like when there is nowhere left for it to go. It writes anyway. The question Machiavelli leaves every man with is not complicated. When the conditions are against you, and they will be, what do you do with what is still inside you?